We often talk about the best and worst songs of a given year, of a decade, of a genre, but for today's episode, we wanted to give you guys our top 10 favorite albums of all time from any genre. We already did it for songs, so we thought it'd be fitting to give it to you guys for albums. Ant has his list, I have mine. And if you guys want to actually find more favorites lists from us, you guys can find a lot of that on our audio podcast, which is exclusive content only available on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. So hit the pinned comment if you guys do want to follow us there and get exclusive content. But let's get into this, man. How did you feel like forming this list? Because I know that my list is always in constant evolution, and it's cool to really go genre by genre and pick out the favorites, right?
Absolutely. I feel like at one point we might have to redo this list, obviously, because a favorites list I feel like is in constant motion. It's always like, well, what was I feeling at a certain point in my life? You know, is there family tradition, let's say, which is actually prominent in my list? What did my father show me? What did my grandfather show me? What was I bumping with my cousins? Like, you know, just kind of what shaped my music taste and what do I hold very dear to my heart? So some honorable mentions, I guess, just to start off the episode, I have The Razor's Edge by AC/DC. That's their studio album. I thought that I'd bring that in there as an honorable mention. Didn't make my list, but I used to bump that all the time with my dad. I have it on physical. One of my favorite albums of all time. Ready to Die by Biggie. An album that actually made my top 10 hip-hop albums of all time, what I think is the best, but didn't end up making my favorites list. Yeah. After that, Appetite for Destruction by Guns N' Roses.
Nice.
One of the first albums my mother bought me actually at Best Buy. I remember when I was young, and she was a big Guns N' Roses fan, so to be able to like actually enjoy that album for the first time was a life-changing experience.
I think that's the album with Welcome to the Jungle, and you also have Sweet Child of Mine. Like, you have a lot of their biggest hits on that album.
Absolutely.
From what I remember.
Then after that, I Want You by Marvin Gaye. One of my favorite, plays of all time when it comes down to soul and R&B music. Just an incredible record. But how about you? Any honorable mentions?
Honorable mentions, of course. 2001 by Dr. Dre. I mean, a gangster rap classic. Tough to leave that one off, to be honest with you. I have Back to Black by Amy Winehouse. One of my favorite, singer-songwriter albums of the last 20 years. You have Below the Heavens by Blue and Exile, Dark Side of the Moon by Pink Floyd, Pet Sounds by the Beach Boys, and much more. But let's get the list cracking, bro. I'm curious to see like how many hip-hop and non-hip-hop you have mixed in there. I feel like for both of us, it's going to be a nice variety. But what's your number 10, man?
So my number 10, and by the way, I want you to reveal your number 10 when I reveal mine.
For sure.
My number 10 is Bubba by Kaytranada. What
wow,
do you
I didn't expect to see that make it. That's
absolutely.
crazy. Okay, my number 10, I don't know if you'd expect to see this on my list either, but it's Swimming by Mac Miller.
Really, very interesting. I have Swimming by Mac Miller as well in
Higher
my top
up?
10.
Okay.
Yeah, okay, but listen, let me talk about Bubba, right? Because this is an album that came out in 2019, I believe, and a lot of people are questioning, well, why do you have a Kaytranada album in your top 10 favorites? And I think it's because I'm from Montreal and I understand the culture here, and it's Montreal is a city that, just has so much culture, has so much richness, has so much flavor to it. And I feel like I hold Montreal very close to my heart, especially being born here, being raised here, building the business out of here. I do feel like that is something I hold very close to myself. And when you're going through Montreal, I do feel like there's no better album to play while you're riding in your car than Bubba by Kaytranada. And it's because Kaytra's from Montreal himself, and you hear so many different flavors of Montreal sound and the different influences that come through. And not only that, but I do feel like it's so versatile as an album track list. You could find hints of Afrobeat in there. You could find hints of boom bap rap. You could find so many different hints of different subgenres. And I do feel like it makes for this beautiful, diverse experience. And it's also an album that I used to play a lot in the pandemic, let's say from 2020 to 2021, where let's say I was having a really shitty day or, I wasn't necessarily in my mood, I would throw this track list on in the morning and it would completely change my perspective. Not only that, but if you guys know me and if you've ever seen me make thumbnails down here in the basement, like I've literally gone through this album like 3 different times from start to finish. Like I've had like 4 to 5 hour graphic design sessions where I've been able to just play this over and over. So I feel like for my late teens into my early 20s, this has been the soundtrack to my life. And as I mentioned before, it's a beautiful play all across the board. And yeah, I wanted to bring it into for today, man.
What's your favorite song off the album?
Oh my goodness. Gray Area with Mick Jenkins is definitely up there. That was, I think, the first song that got me hooked into it because it's one of the more hip-hop-centric records off of the album. But, one of my favorite of all time, shout out to Kaytranada, Montreal legend, and an album at my number 10.
I'm surprised that you chose it over 99.9% because I know that you fuck with that album from Kaytranada really heavy.
Kaytranada is one of my favorite artists of all time, even like one of my favorite producers.
That's why, I don't know, I always feel like you always preferred that one, so it's interesting to see you choose Bubba, but I also prefer Bubba in that race. But my number 10 is going to be Swimming by Mac Miller. Miller. It's the most recent album that I have on here because it came out in 2018. And what's interesting is that when this album dropped, I feel like all the hype was around Astroworld because they shared a release night. And I only ended up checking this album out for the first time probably a week or two after Astroworld dropped. And I didn't love it at first. I sort of just liked it. And then as time has went on, I had more of an admiration for it. I started to love, my love for it just grew and grew. And now it's at a point where it really became one of my favorite albums ever. And I feel like it belongs in that category of the 808s and Heartbreaks and the Man on the Moons and the Take Cares, where it fits into this genre of hip hop where it's male rappers not masking their weaknesses, but actually putting them on full display. And I feel like that movement was kicked off by 808s, but with Swimming, I feel like topically and thematically and conceptually, it's maybe the most focused one out of that genre of albums, you could argue. And when it comes to this album, I love it so much just because it's one of those sad albums that I can lean on. And like everyone has those albums that they go to when they're feeling down or feeling low or having a bad day. And I feel like for a lot of people of this generation, they might go to like Juice WRLD or XXXTentacion, but this album sort of became my pillow. It kind of became this comfort for me when having those rough patches. And to be honest with you, I love it too, just because Mac Miller, it feels like it's his most therapeutic album, because as he was going through this album and actually going from song to song, it felt like he was fighting through his depression and his heartbreak through the music. And what's interesting is that no matter how bleak and dark the lyrics might get, he's always contrasting it with the brightest of soundscapes. If you look at Thundercat's funky bass line on What's the Use, or if you look at the lush horns and strings used by John Bryan on something like Ladders, if you look at So It Goes, the outro, where you have what's supposed to sound like the ascension to heaven, he created this very diverse sonic palette that's just dazzling from start to finish. And it's one of those albums that I need with me at all times. Like even when my aux jack in my car totally broke, I bought this on CD just to have it with me for the
That's
car
very
ride. So it's an all-time favorite of mine, and I'm curious to see if it's going to move up the ladder for the favorites, because it's just been going up and up for me, bro.
Yes, it's really one of my favorite listens of all time as well, and that's why I have it included on my list. But let's go on to number 9. What do you have at your number 9, Lou?
Number 9, I have Exodus by Bob Marley. Came out in 1977.
Incredible. I have Love Deluxe by Sade at number 9.
Nice,
there we
okay.
go.
And that's cool to see on your list, because I feel like it's more of a recent pickup for you, right?
Last year.
Yeah?
It's been really the last year.
Within a year, it managed to crack your top 10. I like that.
This album has just completely taken over my rotation, and has just, I would say, because it's an infectious album. It's really an album that once you start getting into certain records and once you start getting into Sade's passionate and very infectious, I would say, energy and just the way that she conveys herself on a record, she perfectly displays what the emotion of love is supposed to be. Like, this is a record I want to show my child. This is really like one of those albums where it's a must listen for anyone, because it is so beautiful, it is so pure, and it's perfect from start to finish. And I've just, everyone kind of goes through those, like, in your feel sort of points, like, not to get too deep with it or whatever, but this album just sort of like gives you a sense of comfort in every sort of way, kind of maybe like a Swimming does, but in a kind of a different direction, if you get what I'm trying to tell you. And I love how somber the production is. I love how passionate Sade is throughout the entire project. It's really an incredible album that I have fallen in love with. It is one of the greatest albums I've ever heard, and really it's just something that has grown appreciation over time. And that's why I said we might need to redo an episode at a certain point, because I'm always picking up new stuff and I'm like, man, this is really taken over like a period of my life. And that's what I could say for Love Deluxe at this point.
Absolutely. And I think that like having an album in heavy rotation is obviously like a huge fucking benchmark for making it in a list like this. The same way that, like, for me at least, the way that I sort of formed this list was sort of, what music really changed my life or changed the way that I look at the art form as a whole, and a lot of these albums have done that. So let me talk about Exodus by Bob Marley. Like a lot of albums on this list, it's a timeless record, and I think a lot of that comes down to the rich composition, Bob Marley's distinct vocals, and just what it stood for at its time, because this was there was a lot of political turmoil at the time in Jamaica when Bob Marley put this out, and he dropped this after exiling and, fleeing from Jamaica. And what's cool is that it's a concept album that's sort of split up into two. You have a side A and a side B. Side A is Babylon, which sort of represents the current state of affairs in Jamaica and how it's corrupt and how they're facing a lot of oppression over there. And then side B is supposed to represent Mount Zion, this holy city. And more of those songs focus on peace, love, unity. And there's so many classic songs on here like Jammin', like One Love, like Three Little Birds that everyone knows for their smooth reggae grooves and these choruses that are more infectious than a fucking plague. Like you can't get these out of their heads.
Infectious than a plague,
absolutely, bro. They're still getting radio play, and to me, this is some of my favorite vacation music as well. It's one of those albums that can always put me in a relaxing sort of mood and vibe. And I just love Bob Marley's vocals. And it's crazy because when I was a kid, I always viewed Bob Marley as like this, this poster boy for like stoners and like this icon for weed. And I ignorantly never really gave his music the time of day until I was maybe in my mid-teens, and I'm just so glad that I did because albums like this are just so rewarding.
Those are some like must listens for every music fan, just to be able to experience the type of sonics and writing that they're bringing to the table. So excellent pick. Those are our number 9 selections. Let's go on to number 8. This is where I brought in Swimming by Mac Miller.
Nice. Okay.
What do you have?
I have John Coltrane and Johnny Hartman. Came out in 1963.
Incredible album.
You've heard it?
Of course,
yeah?
I have. Absolutely.
Nice.
That's a mainstay in my rotation with my grandfather when I go over to his house and we play records together. I
Fire.
play that a lot on wax. But okay, let me talk about Swimming. I mean, you described it pretty well. Has the same placeholder for myself, and I kind of want to go back to this. This is quite an interesting story. When I got out of high school, I was fucking confused. I was really confused as a kid. When you get out of high school and you're just like, well,
where's my life going?
Where's this shit going? You know,
Yeah.
and where's everything kind of turning? And I felt like that for a long time. I think I felt like that when I got out of high school in like maybe September of 2017 was my first semester of college. Second semester of college was the beginning of 2018, and at that point, I was really like, I was failing. I wasn't doing too well. I was on probation. I don't think I was able to play rugby anymore. I think that they told me I wasn't able to play, and then at that point, I had quit. I had done a bunch of oddball jobs. I worked at McDonald's for like 5 months. That was horrible. That really wasn't fun. Then after that, I did a bunch of shit. I ended up going into construction. Shout out to Nick, man. Like, I don't know how the fuck he did that for so long. I did that for only like 2 weeks because the smell of the asphalt would like really fuck with my sinuses and like it would just make me nauseous. Salute to everyone that really works in that field. It's tough work. And then I ended up going to Costco. And I think Costco for me was like sort of my rock bottom to a certain extent when I realized like, man, I'm really not doing anything at this moment. Then that's kind of like when my love for music journalism kind of sort of picked up when I opened up For the Culture 2000 and I started writing different records. And then at that point at Costco, I remember more towards like later 2018, I wasn't in a good place mentally. I was just so down on myself and like I really didn't like where I was going. None of my bosses liked me. I was jumping from job to job. Nothing school-wise was really making sense. And then I finally was able to get into Mac Miller's Swimming. And what this album did for me was absolutely incredible, where it kind of gave me like that keep swimming sort of motion where it was able to help me get through a lot of my hardship. And it's really one of those albums that I feel like changed my life forever. It gave me a bunch of inspiration for podcasting and diving deep into my own art and really taking my own course in life and just kind of like staying positive regardless of everything else that's going bad. And whenever I go back to this album, it brings me back to that time. Like I think about that time when I'm listening to this album, and it always kind of makes me chuckle, like looking all these years later where I'm at with my life and being able to do this with my brothers. So it's a very, very, very personal album for me. It holds a very special place in my heart. Even though I don't visit it as much anymore, I'm going to admit that. I go back every so often, but I really only use it when I need it, if I'm being honest with you.
Yeah, exactly. It's like a fucking first aid kit. You pull it out when you're really in need. But let me talk about John Coltrane and Johnny Hartman. So I'm a big fan of, jazz music from the 50s and 60s. When you look at what Billie Holiday's done, Miles Davis, of course, Ella Fitzgerald, like some of the best music I've ever laid ears on has come from that era of jazz. And by the way, even something else I thought of, like, if we were to bring in like fucking movie scores, bro, from like John Williams or Hans Zimmer, like that's also some of the most impressive like composition and music that you'll ever lay ears on as well.
Absolutely. That's just crazy.
So that made me think of that as well. But yeah, this album is particularly interesting just because you had this link up and this partnership between a saxophonist, that was John Coltrane, and Johnny Hartman, who was a vocalist that never really sang over jazz instrumentals before, so there was a bit of a learning curve. But when you listen to the music, you're like, he sounds right at home. And it's just, the chemistry is fucking beautiful. The opening song, They Say It's Wonderful, is enough to convince you of the beauty laced within every composition here. The placement of sound is so meticulous. I love how you start off with like the saxophone that's sort of in the background, and then slowly as the song progresses, it becomes the main attraction. And then you have Johnny coming in with these strong baritone vocals, and he has this very bassy and smoky voice, which might appear harsh for the love ballads that you're getting, because that's what this album is about. It's a love album in terms of the themes of each song. But you have this harsh voice singing you these love ballads, and it's really powerful music. And this is one of those albums that, even after dozens of times of playing it, each and every song will give me goosebumps.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's also fun to compare this album to other John Coltrane albums, like, let's say like a Love Supreme, for example, because the saxophone playing is much more meditative. It's much slower paced. The tempos are laid back, more down tempo. So it's very interesting when you look at this in the scope of other John Coltrane music. And I always preferred vocal jazz albums. So that's another thing too. That's maybe why I have this over instrumental jazz albums that are always also in rotation for me. But you have songs in here like My One and Only Love that
incredible records,
only gets vocals like 2 minutes in. That's what I love about this record, is that it's not like the vocalist takes center stage and the music is just in the background. Like, this was a dual effort where every single element of a composition, including the vocals, equally gets their moment to shine. And this is just one of those albums that inspires calm in me. It really settles me in. And it's timeless music.
It is
bro.
a timeless music. By the way, Nick just texted me, said I should probably make this clear. Probation, not in like the law sense of things. Like probation in school, that's like what we called it. Let's say at Vanya. Like I was on probation because of my academic records. Just so you guys know, I didn't want to cause any confusion.
Or secretly a felon.
Listen, there's nothing. I don't think there's anything wrong
What did
with
you
that.
do, Anthony?
Listen, nothing that shouldn't be shared. But yeah, no, it was because of my academic grades. But going back to your album, yeah, absolutely, it's incredible. But you see, I'm the opposite with my jazz records. You
prefer instrumentals, right?
Yeah, I love hearing the instruments just kind of bleed out. But it depends the album. I have my albums where I go into it. But okay, let's go on to number 7. I have the Slim Shady LP by Eminem.
Nice. I have Nothing Was the Same by Drake, which really has climbed the ranks as the years have gone on. Do you have any Drake in your list?
Should I? Yeah, I do at this point.
You do? Okay. Yeah, you said it for swimming. So
yeah, I have it. I have it a bit higher. I'll tell you that.
So we have 2 albums in common so far, I believe.
We do.
Yeah.
But okay, let me talk about the Slim Shady LP. I kind of want to start it off like this. I think that this would be like my favorite comedy movie of all time. I feel like this is like the Step Brothers for me of movies. Where it's like.
Is that your GOAT comedy movie, by the way?
It's up there for sure, yeah.
Over Anchorman, over Old School.
Anchorman's in there for sure. Dodgeball's in there for sure. That's hilarious. But yeah, I have so many of them. But regardless, though, the Slim Shady LP, while it is my favorite comedy movie of all time, or should I say comedy album, I do feel like the mix of horrorcore also implemented into it, mixed in with all of Eminem's imagery and like sort of the writing, kind of takes you away from reality better than any other album, and that's what I really appreciate about this project. And I do think the Marshall Mathers LP is better as far as like writing goes and maybe even production, but this is an album that has had a very big place in my rotation over the years. I remember purchasing this. This is, I think, my first ever purchased album on iTunes, by the way. This and The Blueprint. My cousin Chris, shout out to Chris. I believe it was, he had got to me an iTunes card, and I was still buying my albums off of iTunes. How fucking crazy is that? Feels like such a long time ago, 10 years ago. And I loaded it up onto my iPod, and then going into certain records, I was just hooked off the balance. And I also feel like what type of placement it had for me was it kind of like got my appreciation for hip hop to a further point to where I started to value lyricism. I started to really pay attention to song concepts. I started to be immersed into the universe that an artist would put me in with their writing. So I feel like it helped me a lot in that regard. And I also fell in love with the Slim Shady character, which is one of my favorite like fictional characters in all of entertainment, whether it be movies, whether it be cartoons, whether it be books, music, whatever the case may be. The Slim Shady alter ego is absolutely incredible. Everything from the character development all the way to all the little character traits that Eminem is kind of building upon within the album. It's so genius. And as a kid that was in love with DC and Marvel and just into like that sort of stuff, I always felt like, man, that's something that I really appreciate within music, and I never experienced that before. So it had to make my list. I still go back to it to this day. Classic record, and I feel like it's aged incredibly, to be quite honest with you. So
yeah, it has aged well. I mean, a lot of people I feel like have different opinions about that, about Eminem's catalog as a whole and how it's aged and how ruthless it is. But fuck all that, man. I mean, it's
like watching a Quentin Tarantino movie. You know?
It is,
like,
bro. It has that
you're...
cartoon feel. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
like a raunchy cartoon. You know,
and it has like that sort of explosiveness to it, and that's something I really appreciate. And I love the feel of it. So yeah, go on to your next one, bro.
Nothing Was the Same by Drake. I mean, listen, bro. You know how it is growing up in Montreal, Canada. There weren't too many popping rappers out of our city, out of our country as a whole, and I always felt like Drake was representing for us. You know what I mean? I got onto Drake probably as an album, Take Care. Maybe the first song I ever heard was Over off of Thank Me Later, but Nothing Was the Same was the one that really sealed the deal. But yeah, I mean, when it came to Drake, he was just always a hero, bro. He was always one of my, first favorite rappers that I ever got into and that I always wanted to follow and watch their every next move, and that was inspiring me to have bigger dreams, even though that I'm coming from Canada. And when it comes to this album, there's just so much nostalgia wrapped around it, I feel like, where it comes to a point where it's nostalgic also when I listen to it now, just because of it shows you that Drake was a real student of the game. Because if you look at the foundation of this album, it's built on classic hip-hop. Take, for example, the beginning of Furthest Thing, where you have those DJ Premier-esque scratches, or then you have the transition to the choir sample. Or take a song like Wu-Tang Forever, where Drake is paying homage to the Wu-Tang song It's Yours, where he takes the bar from Raekwon, where he goes, machine gun raps for all my guys in the back, and then he takes RZA's hook, and you're left in awe. You're like, wow, this guy took a hardcore Wu-Tang song and turned it into a love song that's actually a metaphor for the rap game, and it's just genius work. Apart from that, I also think that it stands as one of the best produced rap albums ever, looking at the reversed pitched up sample of Whitney Houston on Tuscan Leather.
Look, can I ask you something?
Yeah.
Did finding out that it's supposed to be listened to in reversed order add any value to you?
It didn't make it go higher in my list or anything. I think it's just a cool little detail. I'm still listening to it in its original order, but
Yeah.
I think the reason why it's my favorite also is just the fact that it made me connect to Drake on a human level. It really made me, through his writing, connect to him on a song like Too Much, where he's rapping about how much he values family, and that now he's reaching a point where he wants to return to those humble beginnings and really prioritize the little things in life, the things that we overlook.
Yeah, it's an incredible
So much
experience.
relatability for me there. Even what he's rapping about in From Time, where he's rapping about, what do all these vacations and all this money, what does it really equate to? What does it really do for my soul? And to me, this just represents a time where Drake wanted to be the best in the game. He was rapping like the rent was due and to influence a generation, and that's what he accomplished. He influenced so many creatives, so many rappers and artists, and it's his best album. So cohesive from start to finish. It's crazy.
It always gets me a bit ticked off when people say that this is not a classic. This is the definition of a classic album. Really, there's nothing behind it.
And talk about the anthems too, bro. Hold On, We're Going Home, Worst Behavior, fucking started from the bottom. Like, this was a different Drake era,
This
bro.
was a really incredible Drake era. But okay, let's go on to number 6.
Number 6.
I have The College Dropout by Ye.
Wow, okay. I have What's Going On by Marvin Gaye from 71.
Okay, very interesting. So let me talk about The College Dropout. This was my introduction to one of the greatest artists of all time, Kanye West, in the rap genre, of course. And I love what this album means to me, because going back to 2015, 2016, I was doing a lot of my first ever Kanye dives. I was around 15, 16 years old, and I'm like, okay, let's do this. Let's have some fun. And going into this album, it made me appreciate discographies more because it was my introduction to one of the greatest discographies of all time. So I have to give it points for that. Not only that, but when I used to work at St. Viator Bagel on Mount Royal, if you guys are from Montreal, you guys for sure know this place. I was working downstairs in the basement, and often I would have to like scrub the floors and clean the walls and the fridges. It would get very cold, but I remember I saved up my birthday money to get myself my first pair of Beats Pros. And what I would do is that I would bring down my phone downstairs with me, and I would just rip all kinds of different albums. But one album that was in constant mainstay was The College Dropout because of different songs on the album that would really speak to me. So example, songs like Spaceships, songs like Jesus Walks, songs like example All Falls Down, just these incredibly written songs that convey so much relatability and that just speak to a young person trying to make it in life and just kind of going on your own path. And I feel like that's really inspired me over the years, and it's kind of like a message that I've always stuck with as I continued growing up, is just to like really bet on yourself and bet on what you have going on in your own life, because no one could kind of tell you shit, and you have to really be in your own zone. And I remember just kind of like dreaming out my life when I was working there and just kind of like, oh man, I want to advance in life. So The College Dropout really represents that for me. And I feel like it's also given me a whole different outlook on creativity as a whole, as a content creator, if that makes sense to you. Just kind of like, how to convey relatability, how to be able to really be passionate about your craft, and how to be able to really connect to an audience, and how to really be able to be selfless with your art. Like, that is what The College Dropout really taught me, and I feel like it is one of the greatest listens I've ever heard. One of my favorite soundscapes ever in the hip-hop genre. Really, a timeless album, and my favorite Kanye album, and what I think is his best.
That's a big W. I'm going to have some Kanye a bit later on as well, for sure. But yeah, listen, What's Going On by Marvin Gaye. I'm a sucker for soul albums. I'm a sucker for concept albums, and this album scratches both of those itches for me. And to be honest with you, all love to my brother Alex, because he's always been like the biggest music head in my family besides me, and he put me on to Marvin Gaye and a bunch of amazing soul artists over the course of my life, really. And to be honest, this came in my life maybe 4 or 5 years ago. He was spinning it on vinyl one day, and I just popped in, and I'm like, fuck is this, bro? This sounds incredible. And I was hooked from that point on. And this album is really special just because, like I was saying, it's a concept album, and it's told from the point of view of a Vietnam War veteran who comes back after serving, and comes back to an America that's being polluted with hate crimes, with violence, with oppression, with racism. And it's sort of this individual being stunned and feeling almost hopeless. And it was actually inspired by, Marvin Gaye's brother Frankie, who had actually served 3 years in Vietnam. And it's amazing the way that he's describing his environment. And to be honest with you, if you would tell me this is the best album of all time, I would believe it. It's so concise. It's probably the best sequenced album I've ever heard. When you're looking at songs like What's Happening, Brother, you end off with this very sweet vocal harmony by Marvin Gaye that literally bleeds into the next song called Flying High, where Marvin Gaye is singing about being hooked to drugs, and he's singing about the withdrawals that he's experiencing through lacking these drugs, and you have vocal crescendos that just emphasize his pain. And that's what I love, is the vocal performance here that takes up so many different forms and pitches, and he's doing it all, man. The background vocals, he's scatting on songs like the intro, What's Going On. There's just so many hints and shades of improvisation vocally. The production is all live orchestra, which is done by David Van de Petit, and it's just flawless music, bro. It really is. And I feel like there's solace when I listen to this. I feel like I'm in this bird's nest with Marvin Gaye, and we're just looking at the world from a bird's eye view. It's stunning. I don't know if when the last time you gave it a full listen was, but
a couple of months ago, actually. I was revisiting Marvin Gaye's catalog.
Yeah, it's his masterpiece. It's his magnum opus for sure. Even songs like Mercy, Mercy Me that will end up being sampled by Jay-Z on Marcy Me, it's lived on so graciously in my rotation.
But okay, let's move into the top 5. Top 5 favorite albums of all time. I have some major albums on here, but At number 5, I have Moving Pictures by Rush. What do you have?
All right, that's interesting because you included some Rush on your top 10 favorite songs of all time as well. I have Graduation by Kanye West. It's time for my Ye album.
Yeah, so talking about Moving Pictures, if you guys are familiar with our episode on my top 10 best songs of all time, was my top 10, no, it was top 10
Top 10 favorite
favorites.
songs.
Yeah, Red Barchetta ended up making it as a placement on my list, and going into Moving Pictures, which is the album which, kind of has that song on it. It's incredible to go back to this album every single time just because of what this album not only means to me, but what it means to me musically. I feel like it's one of those first albums for me that really made me appreciate music as a whole. And when we were in New York, we were having conversations with people. And I was just saying how, like, Rush really gave me a standard for quality. It's like my litmus test, if I'm being completely honest with you. And if you guys are not familiar with Rush, the band is composed of Neil Peart, rest in peace, like one of my biggest inspirations in life, Alex Lifeson, and then after that, Geddy Lee. And just to be able to see the type of music that they're able to compose out of like a 3-piece band is absolutely incredible. But some of my favorite songs of all time on here, like even YYZ, Limelight, Tom Sawyer, Red Barchetta, just the soundtrack to my childhood, man, and what my father used to play me in the car when he used to drive me to hockey tournaments. And I don't know if I could get more Canadian than that, playing Rush on a way to a hockey tournament as a kid. It's just, it gives you a different type of feeling back then, and I still go back to it all the time, kind of just for more comfort, and even what this album means to music fans, just because Rush kind of went against the grain with their writing, where it was very like, it kind of like, it was almost educative writing to a certain extent, to where they would bring in like a lot of science fiction. They would bring in a lot of different like ideologies and topics that wouldn't be covered by progressive rock bands in the 80s. And this was something that I really enjoyed from an album experience, is just to be able to like even go through something like a Tom Sawyer and just enjoy that type of writing. One of the best written songs I've ever heard in my life. Red Barchetta, just the storyline of that song is so captivating. Like, it's incredible, and the best drums ever on a record. No, like, it's not even a competition. Neil Peart is an animal. Neil Peart is a fucking animal. Like, one of the greatest musicians of all time. And I've seen this album even played live in concerts. Really, just, and I feel blessed for saying that. Thank God for my dad. I think he's upstairs, actually. I'm going to have to go thank him later for bringing me to that concert. Just like, I remember that night like it was yesterday. Just seeing fucking Neil Peart playing on his 36-piece. I can't even believe I got to see that.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, I've heard tracks off the album. I never gave it a full listen though, so definitely got to tap into that.
I think if I go in my dad's car, we still have the original CD we used to spin back when I was back, because my dad's very meticulous with his CDs. I wasn't able to like touch the CDs in certain places. Like, he would like get mad at me, like if I were to like, let's say, leave fingerprints or anything. So yeah, my dad. Shout out to Mike.
All right, my number 5, Graduation by Kanye. And honestly speaking, every time that I listen to this album, I feel like I'm in the future, bro. I feel like I'm listening to music that was made in 3024. And that's just the growth and the evolution and the step up that Kanye took from Late Registration to Graduation, to keep that sentiment of soul samples and soul in the undertones of his music, but accelerated by bringing in electronic synths and bringing in house music the way that he did. And that's what this album's always represented for me. Like, this has always been my album where I'm like, you know what? If I have to judge an artist's artistic growth from one album to the next, I can always look at Late Reg to Graduation, because Kanye really did it, bro. He really reinvented himself and literally graduated from one sound to another. And this album has always had a special place in my heart, because it's always been my, fuck the Matrix album. Fuck the 9 to 5. Like, if you want to chase your dreams, nothing is impossible. That's what this album has taught me. And I feel like that's what Kanye lyrically is chasing throughout this whole album, is him going for his own freedom, carving his own path, as you'll hear on a song like Can't Tell Me Nothing, or especially on a song like I Wonder. And that's a perfect example, I Wonder, of Kanye taking a soul sample, but upgrading it with the sound through those heavy drums and those electronic synths. But I just feel like this is my favorite era of Kanye, because he sounds like he's had his happiest. You listen to all 13 of these songs, and they're uplifting. They're all celebratory tracks. And to me, this is always like my victory music. If something good happens in my life, or if I catch a W in any way, I want to throw on Can't Tell Me Nothing. I want to listen to Champion, just because this album is just a source of motivation for me. It always has been. It always will be. And not only did it change the course of production in hip hop, but it also has this amazing concept of leaving your hometown and realizing that even if you go back, it'll never be the same, which you hear on a song like Homecoming, for example. And it's just, I love what Kanye did here. Like I said, big source of motivation for me. And it's really Kanye's best for me. 13 songs that never lose steam. And even though a lot of people don't like Drunken Hot Girls, it's still a W to me.
All right. Let's continue going
Top
on
four,
with this.
baby.
Top 4, all right. So at number 4, I have Nothing Was the Same by Drake. What do you have at number 4?
I have Back in Black by AC/DC, which came out in 1980.
That's a huge W. So Nothing Was the Same by Drake, an album that you mentioned on your list. As a Canadian, I feel like it would be criminal not to have this on your list if you're a hip-hop fan. It changed everything. It really did change everything, and I feel like as a Canadian, you could really feel the impact of this album and how not only was it able to connect to all kinds of different hip-hop fans, but how it was able to connect to the Canadian youth, especially our generation, like at a time where we were 13, 14 years old and we were going into high school and we needed kind of like an anthem to our life. And what's interesting is that I didn't appreciate this track list off the bat, but it was always a Drizzy album that I kind of lightly enjoyed. You know, if you know me, you know that I didn't like Drake's music at first. I really wasn't tuned into it like that, and I was always more into Kendrick. I was into more Joey Badass. Like, I was into a lot more lyrical stuff, you know? And then once I started to find the value in the writing of Nothing Was the Same when I got older, this album changed my whole perspective on life, gave me a completely different outlook on how I should carry myself professionally. And this album was a game changer for the way that I was able to assess risk in my own life and the way that I kind of built up the brand. If I'm being completely honest with you guys, this album really, I believe, like pushed NFR into a completely different direction. At least for myself, like, the way that we built out the brand and the way that we try to, like, you know, do things. Like, there's a lot of things on Nothing Was the Same that happened that kind of bleed into our inspiration for NFR, not for radio. You know?
This is nothing for the radio, Tuscan Leather lyrics.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
If you guys know the backstory of originally our name, like, it comes from Tuscan Leather, and like we were in your basement that night trying to do a name switch because we realized For the Culture 2000 was going to go nowhere, and we ended up getting Nothing Not for Radio podcast.
Inspired by Tuscan Leather and the song Not for Radio by Nas.
So like I'm looking at this project that obviously like holds so much weight in my life. This whole project has changed me as a person, and it's directly inspired by Nothing Was the Same. And just follow your dreams, man, throughout this entire album. But also the concept of, like, once you do make it there and once you reach the top and the pinnacle, remember what you had to go through to be able to get there. You know, remember your family, remember the people that helped you there. Stay hungry, stay competitive, stay locked into a certain zone. Like, this album means so much to me because it gives me so many different perspectives in life. So big
it
W
does.
for me.
It does.
Shout out
yeah.
to Drake. You know what? Like, I'm gonna have to give him his flowers. Like, fuck that, man. Like, this album really changed my life, and as a Canadian guy, like, it really changed the way I look at the world. You know,
it's always a fucking good time listening to that album, bro. You'll never catch me in a mood where I'm like,
no.
You're playing From Time right now. Throw it off. You're playing 305 to My City. No. You'll never catch me at any point where I'm not down to listen to that album. And that's what I love about it too, is that it's so accessible, man, at the end of the day. It really is. Which I guess you could say for a lot of Drake's music. But yeah, let me talk about my number 4 pick, Back in Black.
Huge W.
This is really my childhood album. Like, I really had to include at least one of these. And to be honest with you, yeah, I have so many memories attached to this.
Didn't your dad bring you to the concert for this while they were in Montreal?
In 2008, yeah.
You were 8 years old?
I was 8 years old. People ripping joints all across me. Some people sniffing some snow to my left. I mean, it was a fucking shit show. But you had AC/DC bring out the fucking bell, bro, that you hear on Hell's Bell.
Crazy.
And that's how they opened up the fucking concert.
I bet you remember that for the rest of your life.
I remember that forever, bro. It was at the Olympic Stadium. It was an amazing fucking show. But yeah, I just have so many memories attached to this because growing up, my parents weren't constantly playing music in the house, to be honest with you, but they did appreciate the art form, and they always encouraged me and my brother to be into music. And it came to a point where I started playing piano. My brother started getting into playing the guitar, and we were always sort of really interested in music. And what ended up happening was that my dad had this old 2008 Honda Accord, and
I remember that car.
yeah,
man.
bro.
Wow.
And in his glove box, he always kept a rotation of, I'd say, like 10 to 12 albums.
That's always what it was.
It was always
they never overjunked everything.
They never overjunked it. Just a good curated selection of 10 to 12 albums. And the one that I would always tell my dad to fucking put on was Back in Black. And the way it sounded in that car, bro, the car speakers on, I don't know what speakers they were, if they were Bose.
Shout out to the Honda
I don't know
Accords.
what they were, but it sounded incredible, from Hell's Bells to Shook Me All Night Long to Shoot to Thrill. Just some of the most electrifying rock production that you could listen to. Powerful, gritty, dark. And I don't want to get into the whole backstory of how this album was formed, but it's very interesting because it was a tribute to the original AC/DC singer Bon Scott. But story for another day. Amazing backstory to this album. But honestly, listening to it now is hilarious just because almost every song is about sex, bro. Like, it's really crazy to go back and hear how raunchy it is and how many metaphors there are. Like, Shoot to Thrill is not what I thought it was when I was 8 years old.
Yeah, absolutely.
Not at all. But
that's it, though. Like, that's what you have to appreciate about AC/DC, right? It's like there's that raunchiness to it. It's like...
it's party rock music. That's really what it is for the most part.
Yes and no, bro. I also feel like it's great for gym settings. This
is
This is a mainstay also for my gym rotation as well. Shoot to Thrill. You know, like I'm that serious, man. Fuck that.
And just like the dynamics between, let's say, Brian Johnson and Angus Young. Like, there's a part on Shoot to Thrill where you'll hear Brian go like, "Shoot ya," and then you'll hear Angus Young reply with like these bluesy guitar licks, and it's a call and response
with his guitar. Yeah, and he makes it speak through his guitar. Yeah, it's
genius,
incredible.
bro.
By the way, did his finger start bleeding when you watched him?
Yeah, his finger started bleeding.
Yeah, that's fucked,
bro. It was a hell of an experience. I could talk about this album all day, but like I said, I'll save the background story for another time. But
maybe on the audio podcast.
Yeah, let's get into the top three. My number 3 choice is gonna be "Ready to Die" by Biggie, which at one point was my number 1. Like I said, it's in constant evolution. Today, it's number 3.
My number 3 is going to be "To Pimp a Butterfly" by Kendrick Lamar.
Which I also know at one point was your number 1, right?
Yeah, well, I'm not sure over my current number 1. It was always in contention there. But yes, my number 3 of all time. This is my favorite album to nerd out to. You know, and people kind of like look at hip-hop fans like, oh, like, why do you like this album? You know, and they're always questioning, like, why do you like "To Pimp a Butterfly"? And I always answer, like, what's there not to like about this album, bro? It's legitimately one of the most impressive albums I have ever gone through, writing-wise, performance-wise, sequencing-wise, production-wise. On every single note, it just checks off everything. And I could just talk about, like, you know, the technicalities of it. I've gone through the Tupac poem. I've talked about the concept of the caterpillar, the cocoon, and the butterfly, to pimp something that's beautiful. Like, you could go through all kinds of different things. The whole thing of it's supposed to be like Tupac inspired, and like, you know, the original title change. I've covered that before. I have done so much content on this album because there is too much content to do on this album. It is legitimately one of the greatest put together albums of all time. I do think when you go through it, it forces you to be engaged. This is an album that forces you to want to go through the writing and pick up all kinds of steam and pick up all kinds of different writing. And even at that, like, looking at certain records and the types of ideologies and knowledge you're getting from Kendrick on a song like, example, "These Walls" or even "Mama," it's top tier when it comes to the writing format and what you want to put into your life. And I was having a conversation with someone about this yesterday, and we were having a conversation about just the types of frequencies and the type of energy you get from music, right? Because music is energy. The way that the notes hit you, the way that the writing kind of formulates your mindset. You have to be careful about what type of music that you play around you, because it could influence you to do good things, it could influence you to do bad things, it could create a certain mindset for you, whatever the case may be. And I've always felt like this album is so pure in approach and has so much to do with love and just the concept of triumph and kind of breaking through walls and all the types of different things like generational hurt. And it's just so rich as an album experience. And it's an album that I think will forever be in rotation for me. It's an album I want to show my kids. It's an album that I think has such a big, important part to play in my life. It's everything. And I think it's my favorite album from my favorite artist ever. So it's
big W. Yeah, I always like to say that, you know, "To Pimp a Butterfly" is kind of like an onion. You know, you just peel back layer after layer, and with every listen, you get something new out of that fucking album. So, love to see it on your list. And who knows? I mean, would it be in a top 15 list for me? Maybe. But Number 3, Ready to Die. I've spoken about this a lot on the episode that we did on the best 90s album, I believe. And you know how I feel about it. It's peak hip hop to me. It reinvigorated the East Coast. And honestly speaking, for a lot of like these top 3 albums, I don't want to spend too much time because I feel like I've gone through them at length for at least a good chunk of them. But yeah, when it came to this album, it's such a cinematic listen, going from Biggie's birth to death. Like, just the ideology behind that concept was genius. And I also love that Biggie gave us a character to follow along for. You know what I mean? He was sort of like this anti-hero that was lovable. Because even on a song like Machine Gun Funk, where, you know, he's rapping about taking out certain crews, he'll bring in like a Tina Turner interpolation where he's like, "What's love got to do?" Like in the middle of the fucking song. Yeah. And that's like the humor and the charm that you get out of Biggie. And of course, on a technical level, the rhyme schemes are incredible. The internal rhymes, the multi-syllabic schemes. The guy was the full package as a rapper, and I always said this, that maybe he doesn't have the best legacy of all time in hip-hop, but when I hear any rapper on any given beat, Biggie to me is the best. Like, he's just, when I hear him on a song, there's no one that could fuck with him. I don't think he's ever been out-rapped either, to be honest with you, but I've spoken about this album a lot, so that's all I'll say for now, but just classic, bro. Classic 90s hip-hop. But yeah, our top 2 now.
All right, number 2, go for it, Lou. You say
my number 2 is going to be Songs in the Key of Life by Stevie Wonder.
I have Kind of Blue by Miles Davis on my number 2 position. So I'll start off again. I think you guys know how much I enjoyed this album. If you guys have been listening to the podcast for a long time, Blue and Green is my favorite song of all time. There's really there's no debate about that. And this is the best music to relax and reflect to. You know, no matter what problem you have in your life, you could throw on Kind of Blue and get down to that problem. I feel like it is the ultimate tuning key. Like, it's the ultimate tuner to your soul, bro. Just if you feel like corrupted, if you feel like, you know, wronged by, if you feel like, you know, joyous and happy, if whatever the case may be, this will bring you to a normal and just level stance, and that's why I appreciate this album so much. And it has to do with my grandfather as well. Shout out to my pops. You know, you guys know him, obviously. My grandfather, Paul. Incredible man. I hope to be at least an inch of what he is. You know, just incredible person. And I bought him this CD when I was 7 years old at the Montreal Jazz Festival. My father remembers that story, and it was because the album cover is so iconic. And then when my grandfather would drive me to school all the time, or he would drive me to work, let's say, or, you know, we would drive to hockey games in Montreal. He used to bring me to a lot of hockey games. We used to play this from start to finish, and flamenco sketches, Blue and Green, So What? I mean, you know.
So you put your grandfather onto this album?
No, he put me.
Okay. So you say you bought it for him? Like, shit, no, that's
because
crazy.
my grandfather obviously knew the album, and he had it on
I would
wax.
expect so, yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And he used to follow. I'm not sure what the jazz station here is in Montreal, but he used to have this jazz station on in constant rotation. Whenever, like, they were like old Radioheads, you know, like they would throw it on, and whenever he would like hear something from Kind of Blue, like, he would just turn it up, you know. Mm-hmm. and that's something that I really appreciate, and I appreciate him so much. A big mentor in my life, a big legend, so I had to bring that in.
Awesome. Yeah. So yeah, my number 2, Songs in the Key of Life by Stevie Wonder. A lot of people consider this to be the best album of all time, and it's interesting because a lot of albums on my list are concise. They're like between 6 and 13 songs, but this album's an hour and 45 minutes. It's 21 songs, and each one is fucking flawless. And when you look at Stevie Wonder's vocal range and what he's able to do, the pipes that he has, like, if there was ever a voice that literally could have like miraculous healing powers, it would be Stevie Wonder, and you could hear that on songs like Love's in Need of Love Today. Absolute classic. But what I appreciate the most is just the musicianship that Stevie Wonder brought to this. I mean, there were over 130 people that made this album possible in terms of writers, in terms of the orchestra that was at play. But what I love is that Stevie Wonder had his hand in everything in terms of the music production. He was the main vocalist, of course. He was on the harmonica. He was on the piano, on the drums. This guy was playing every fucking instrument, lending his vocals. And to me, I was always amazed by that. It was always so awe-inspiring that he could be a one-man band. And when I go through this album, it just represents the magic of music, the way that it makes us feel, the way that it connects us as human beings, the way that it's its own language, the way that it could flip our mood. I mean, that's embodied on a song like Sir Duke, where Stevie Wonder is just riffing off about how you could feel it all over the place when music has a hold on you. And that's what this album does for me. It's songs that you could use for any life situation. And as I said, the compositions are so rich. The subject matter, the writing. You go to songs like Village Ghetto Land, so advanced for its time. Absolute masterpiece. And there is a reason why you have people like Prince calling this their biggest inspiration, or people like Elton John saying it's their favorite album of all time. Like, this influenced listeners, and it also influenced your favorite artists ever. So shout out to Stevie. Fucking love this album, man.
Yeah, incredible. Listen, but number one, you guys probably know it on my end, but Lou, go for your number one.
What do you think my number one is?
Illmatic? No, Good GKMC for sure.
Good Kid, Mad City by Kendrick Lamar has moved up to my number one.
I have 2001 by Dr. Dre at my number one. So 2 West Coast hip hop albums as the number one.
Yes, and what's interesting is that, like, I'm more of an East Coast hip hop fan all around, but I do tend to have Good Kid, Mad City above everything else. But honestly, I don't have too much to say about Good Kid, Mad City because I've spoken about it probably a million times.
Yeah, I think it did a lot for us to, like, example, like 2000, even GKMC for me. I mean, fuck yeah.
I'm still going to talk about it, but talk to me about 2001.
Guys, I don't have much to say about it. You guys know how I feel about it. I think it's the best ever produced album of all time, in my opinion, for hip hop. My introduction to hip hop. The first album my mother ever bought me, next Appetite for Destruction as well. I remember we were in the States, and right after my cousin showed me this album, it's like I saw it, and my mom saw the marijuana leaf on it, and she's like, "Are you sure?" I'm like, "Yeah." And she's like, "Oh, okay, cool." And then after that, when we were in Plattsburgh, because if you guys are from Montreal, we always go to Plattsburgh in upstate New York. You know, it's such a close drive, and my mom used to go grocery shopping there when I was a kid. I played it all the way through, and she was listening to the lyrics, and she's looking at me, and she's like, "Well, fuck it, you know, just enjoy it for what it is." And it's been in rotation ever since. So
absolutely, yeah, Good Kid, Mad City by Kendrick. I mean, this came into my life at a very formative period. I was 12 years old, and to me, this is like the instant classic of our generation. A lot of people talk about how for them it was Illmatic or it was Get Rich or Die Trying, but if you're a 2000s baby or a late 90s baby, this was the album that really had impacted your life, and that's what it did for me. This album shaped who I am as a creator, as a person. It was really that album that built my love and passion for hip-hop because it made me want to pull up Genius and use that app. It made me want to look into the rich storylines of certain albums, and I've always said this, my 2 favorite art forms are music and film, and this bridged the gap between the 2 of them. Fucking flawless album, top tier lyricism, and the most universal album because not only does it have rich messages, but it's also the most accessible album. And that's, to me, the best thing that you could do in music is have an accessible album that could also be played in any setting and could reach the masses. Kendrick did his fucking job right, but that's my number one, man.
Incredible episode. I have to say that.
I love recording this and talking about these.
This is one of my favorite ever recordings that we've been able to do because it kind of gives you guys an insight onto our life and kind of what shaped us as music listeners. So guys, let me know, what's your favorite album of all time? I'd love to see what you guys have in store for us in the comment section, and just thank you so much from the entire NFR team. We love you guys so much, and the love and support means everything to us. This wouldn't be possible without you guys, and we hope maybe we're able to put you guys onto some game today with some of our favorites of all time. But as Lou mentioned at the beginning of this episode, audio podcasts every single Tuesday. If you guys want to check them out, they're available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or anywhere else you guys listen to your audio experience. Guys, thank you so much for watching this episode. We'll be back with another one